Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon.
We are ready to hear from this afternoon's witness, Mr. Ian Arthur. Mr. Arthur, please can we begin by you stating your full name?
My name is Ian John Arthur.
And please can the witness be sworn?
Thank you. I, Ian Arthur, swear by Almighty God that the evidence that I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
You have provided a witness statement to the inquiry dated the 4th of June 2026 in response to a Rule 9 request from the inquiry. You have a copy in front of you. It runs to 42 pages and 272 paragraphs. On the last page, it's been signed by you, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And it bears a statement of truth. Have you had an opportunity to read that statement recently?
I have, yes.
And is there anything in it that you wish to correct?
No.
And can you confirm today that the contents are true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
That's correct, yes.
Now, that statement stands as your evidence before the inquiry, and I'll be asking you questions based on it. But if there's something I don't cover that's in your statement, that evidence remains in front of the inquiry. I will broadly follow the headlines, the headings in your statement. It starts with a section of your career background and experience. On the first page, paragraph 3, you're a registered mental health nurse since completing your training in August 2000, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And currently, and since November 2025, you've been seconded to the Mid and South Essex NHS Foundation Trust as an integrated discharge hub mental health lead. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
But before then, and in fact, still, you've got uninterrupted employment with what is now EPUT and its predecessor trust since January 2003.
That's correct.
So that's substantially with the North Essex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust.
That's correct, yes.
Referred to at various times as NEP or NEPT in your statement. There will be times in your statement when I try and clarify with you whether you're talking, when you talk about a trust, which one you're talking about, and substantially that's whether it's before or after April 2017 at the point of merger. I'm going to take you through, in brief terms, a summary of some of your experience. In 2003, you were charge nurse at Drake House in Chelmsford. And was that an older adult dementia assessment ward?
That's correct, yes.
You then had community roles from 2004 to 2008, including adults of working age and older adults.
That's correct, yes.
From January 2009 to December 2011, you were ward manager at Lucas Ward at the Kingswood Centre in Colchester. Was that an older adult inpatient ward for those with complex care needs?
That's correct, yes.
And you described that as your first leadership position?
That's correct, yes.
Lucas Ward was decommissioned at the end of 2011, and at which point you went back, I think, to a community-based role from January 2012 to, starting in January 2012, at the newly commissioned dementia services at the Kingswood Centre.
That's correct, yes.
At a stage in, I think before March 2015, you became an advanced nurse practitioner within the same team. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then come November 2015, you were appointed clinical manager or inpatient services matron at the Crystal Centre, Chelmsford, at the Broomfield Hospital site. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you describe that as mid-locality. Mid-locality, is that the sort of geographical assignment that there was under NEPT?
That's correct, yes.
And there you had leadership of two wards, Topaz Ward, which was a dementia care ward.
That's correct, yes.
And Ruby Ward, a functional older adult ward. And I think you also had responsibility for the then community team for people with dementia.
That's correct, yes.
And at that stage, you had ward managers, 3 senior staff, and about 100 staff under you.
That's about right.
Without naming names, your managers at that time, your direct reporting manager, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, stayed as your direct reporting manager for a substantial amount of time.
There was a break when I was at the Crystal Centre when the line management changed from my previous line manager, and then there was an internal reorganisation for a community and inpatient split, and my previous manager, who had been my manager from 2009 to 2015 when I went to the Crystal Centre, she became my manager again. That break was around about a year, possibly about 18 months. I can't remember exactly. But then that person became my manager again from that period of time until she retired in 2022.
2022. Okay, so a substantial period of time with substantially the same line manager, but with some structural changes at times.
Yes.
Come December 2017, so now this is post-merger, your location changes to the northeast area, but I think your role's still the same in terms of clinical manager matron. And your responsibilities were now for Tower and Bernard wards within the Landermere Centre on the Clacton District Hospital site.
That's correct.
And they're both dementia care inpatient wards?
They were both dementia care wards. Tower ward was, at that time, a female dementia care ward, and Bernard ward was a male dementia care ward, and they were both geographically based at Clacton Hospital at the Landermere Centre.
And I think you also had responsibility for Heneage ward, and that was an older adult functional ward at the Kingswood Centre, Colchester.
That's correct, yes.
So some geographical split between the wards you were managing. And then at some point in 2018, your responsibilities additionally included the management of the Peterborough ward. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Can you remember when in 2018?
I can't remember exactly when 2018.
Any idea at all as to beginning, end?
I could not even pretend to guess.
Okay. I'm not asking you to guess. So
That's fine.
Thank you.
It's in 2018. I really cannot remember.
And the Peterborough, can you describe briefly what the Peterborough ward was?
So Peterborough ward is physically based at the Kingswood Centre, which is a part of both Heneage and Tower. Peterborough are both based in the same building. Peterborough itself is an assessment unit that was designed to be working in a similar way to what is currently Grangewater at the Basildon Hospital. So geographically, the old south part of the organisation had Grangewaters to offer patients an assessment unit model, and Peterborough was what was an old north geographical based assessment unit model for the northeast, the mid and the northwest localities. So both Grangewaters and Peterborough offer that similar kind of way of working and service for the patient use.
Remind me where physically Peterborough unit is?
Peterborough is based in Colchester at the Kingswood Centre.
So at some point in 2018, you have an additional ward. I don't think that stretches your geographical area.
No.
And then the Bernard ward is mothballed, I think you say, in April 2020. And Tower becomes a standalone mixed-sex ward at the Landermere Centre site.
That's correct,
Is that
yes.
right? Focusing on the Peterborough ward, do you know why you were asked to manage that ward?
My portfolio, a lot of my work was geographically based at Heneage ward at Kingswood Centre, and I believe I was asked to take it on because actually of the physical locality of me being on site predominantly most of the time. The previous matron split their time between the Lakes and the Kingswood Centre, and I think probably for pragmatically obvious reasons, if I'm physically based on one site, it would make more sense for me to take over matron responsibility for 2 wards based on the similar on the same site.
And how did you split your time? And I'm focusing here on 2018 to 2020, between the wards you had responsibility for.
I would generally spend 2 days my week in Clacton and 3 days my week in Colchester. That's a generalisation. If there was something more urgent on one of the other sites, then my time would be split wherever the priority would be. But predominantly, I would be spending probably 3 days at Colchester and 2 days in Clacton.
And sort of emergency aside, not travelling between sites on the same day?
No. I have done in the past. If there was a need for me to do that, then I would travel urgently to whichever site might be needing my time in a more pressing kind of situation. But on the whole, no. The distance between Colchester and Clacton is not substantial, but it's not the best use. It wasn't the best use of my time to be driving across sites frequently.
Is it fair to say that pre-2008, most of your work had specialised, had focused on older adults?
Probably 2/3 of my career has been older adults and a third has been adults. So my time prior to 2000 to 2003, I worked in an adult mental health ward in London, and I've had a fair amount of my community career with adults of working age as well in the community. That's physically based, thinking about it, the old northeast, mid and northwest localities.
What support were you given, if any, to prepare yourself for a change in age group in 2018 with responsibility for Peterborough Ward?
My previous experience working with adults is something that was not something that wouldn't be alien to me, to working with people who have severe mental health problems who are adults working age as well. So from my experience in community and my previous time in working in London, my skill sets it wasn't alien to my experience of working with these kind of patient population.
And going back to splitting your time between 2 different sites in the way you describe, what challenges were there in managing wards on different sites?
It's having split sites is never a particularly easy way of working, particularly if something urgent arises. Sometimes work is quite predictable, sometimes work is very unpredictable. The ability to utilise my time where the services were experiencing complexities, particularly for the patient cohort, it wasn't something that was very challenging for myself. So, for example, if I needed to go to Clacton for an urgent reason, my line manager was based at Kingswood Centre at the time, and if there was something that she needed to pick up for me, she would do. Or if there's vice versa, if I was in Clacton and something urgent was happening in Colchester, I could come back to Colchester with relative ease. It wasn't a complicated issue to manage 2 sites. It was just something that I was aware of, needing to make sure that the plans that I put in place were as followed as best as they could be. Urgent situations happen at the drop of a hat, but my plan was generally to split my time as equitably between both Clacton and Colchester, and I did that to the best of my ability.
And then between specific wards, were you able to spend relatively equal amounts of time on each ward?
Yes.
And were there times when you were at either site when you weren't on the ward?
Prior to COVID, quite often there would be meetings that were based geographically in Chelmsford, all the Wickford areas after we merged. So there would be periods of times where seniors would be attending meetings for whatever particular reason that was called for. So there would be times that me as a matron, I would not be on site, and that also continued through the COVID period. And since the use of remote systems like Teams, that has helped the less need to drive to lots of different sites at the same time. So yes, there would be times that I wouldn't be around on both sides.
And is it right that Peterborough ward, because it's an assessment unit, patients are acutely unwell, but the expectation is that they don't stay for very long, perhaps a number of days only. How, if you're split in the way you describe, how do you ensure that you're aware of the needs of the population at any particular time?
My routine as a matron generally used to be of walking the wards predominantly first thing in the morning. When Clacton went down to one ward, I would go and physically check on the ward. By physically going onto the ward itself, I'll check in with the team that's working. Because of the fact that there are shifts, I wouldn't see the same team within one time I visit the ward to another. And that would be the same for when I was physically based at Colchester as well. So I'd go predominantly before I'd even put my bag down, I'd go and check on the wards, see if there's anything urgent that happened over the past time that I'd actually been there. So if it was a weekend, I'd check in the morning on the Monday, see what's going on. And then that would carry on when I physically arrived on the wards, that I'd go to check on both Peterborough and onto Heneage ward as well. So the ability to get a feel of what's going on was something that I was hopefully able to pick up very first thing when I visited the wards.
And in terms of your, we may come back to Peterborough ward later, but in terms of your roles and responsibilities, come November 2022, you become secondment interim service manager for the North East locality, which you describe as a leadership role for the urgent care pathway, and when you had responsibility for 6 wards, still including Peterborough and others. In what ways did your role change then?
So my matron role had responsibility for 2 sites and 3 wards. The secondment gave me responsibility for all 6 wards in the North East locality. So they are based at the Lakes in Colchester, which has Gosfield Ardley ward. Kingswood Centre has Heneage and...
I'm just going to pause you there.
Sorry.
My fault. We're going slightly too fast.
Beg your pardon. So my responsibilities would be for those 6 wards, including a rehab ward, which is based in the community, and the urgent care pathway. The urgent care pathway is teams including hospital liaison at Colchester Hospital and the demand from there, the crisis response team for people in a state of urgency, and home treatment team for people that might need interventions similar to a hospital setting that are quite significantly complex in their presentation at that time. So it would be 6 wards and the urgent care pathway, which had 3 domains within that pathway itself.
So it sounds like a significantly wider role.
That's correct.
Does that take you away from the wards, even though the wards are under your management? Does it take you further away from them?
Physically, yes. My location changed from, my base was at Kingswood Centre, and my base then was moved to the Lakes, which is probably 200 metres down the road, but it's still part of an EPIT site. And that's because that's where historically the service manager role was, and the admin arrangements around it as well. So I swapped one site for another, but I also had the ability to access physically to go down and see the wards at the Lakes if there was a requirement for me to do so. But there was also a matron there in position as well. So in some respects it took me further away from the day-to-day contact, but there was an added layer of responsibility for the extra demands from 3 other teams and 3 other wards and another urgent care pathway as well.
Do you think this impacted on your exposure to or understanding of what was happening at ward level? It had the opportunity to do so, but my practice would allow me to make sure that I would have time with the clinical leads of the team. So I would make sure that I had time with the consultants that were booked in for informal catch-ups. That sometimes it was on Teams and sometimes it was because they were based in the same building. And I would also have contact regularly with the matrons and the ward managers
for things that might pop up that as a service manager I probably was unaware of myself, being a matron. But so that gave me a better overview of some of the demands in particular areas and hotspots. Peterborough being one of those quite clinically demanding areas, and I was probably quite aware of the demand on the matron level, but also as a service manager you become aware of the other demands more strategically for the other teams and the urgent care pathway as well.
And had the role that you'd been doing immediately prior to the secondment interim service manager, was that backfilled by somebody? I'm not asking who by, but...
It was, yes.
It was, okay. And really only to clarify, if you look briefly at paragraph 18, which is at the end of the section, very end of the section on your career history and summary of experience, you say that prior to your time of working with dementia-specific services, I did not receive any specific training in regard to dementia care. Was that written, what year were you thinking about when you were writing that? Your whole career or the much earlier part of your career?
My entire career, up until that point in time, there was actually no, whilst you are exposed to lots of different things as part of your nurse training, there was no specific dementia-specific training for looking after people with dementia. That was something that was born out of the development of the dementia service that I become team leader of in 2012. So that actually working with people with mental health problems is a complex process, but working with people with dementia, adding into that, is a very, very complex process. And to have some formal training was felt that it was needed, and that is now there's mandated training for most people to undertake some sort of a dementia training. But prior to that, there was no formal training of any sort of any form for looking after people with dementia care.
And you say in paragraph 18, it continues, in 2011, NEPT developed dementia-specific professional training that was offered via Essex University. What was do you know why that came about? Were you anything to do with it coming about?
It was part of the development of what was then the dementia pathway. The dementia pathway was commissioned following the closure of Lucas Ward, and the dementia pathway looked at to enhance people's understanding and offer patients who have dementia a better experience, particularly for people in hospital settings as well. So it was developed in collaboration with Essex University at the time, which was then obviously part of NEPT. And I'm unsure whether in 2011 that was offered to people that had access to Essex University that might have worked for SEPT. So the reasons why I made reference to NEPT is actually that was developed in collaboration with Essex University and what was NEPT at the time.
And you say it's still offered to this day?
I believe it is, yes.
But to registered professionals only?
That's correct.
So if you're an unregistered staff, and you say this in your statement, you have access to mandatory training to increase understanding for those who have a diagnosis of dementia. I take it that that's something different and less involved than the training you describe in collaboration with Essex University? That's
correct. The mandated training for people who have dementia is part of EPAT's mandatory training compliance. But for people with dementia, with registered practitioners, they can have access to further professional development in themselves for people with dementia. And there is a difference, obviously, between registered and unregistered colleagues. But the level of training to help understand why people might present in a particular way, my personal time understanding that came out for that from experience. But it's not mandated for. If you have a professional interest in working with people with dementia, you probably have access to these kind of professional services. But if you're an unregistered colleague who's coming into a new position, to try and understand why somebody might be presenting in a particular way can be quite difficult to understand why that is the case. And having limited mandatory training will give you some knowledge, but might not give you the full understanding of why somebody might be presenting in a particular way. And I just think it's important to note that.
Can I ask, have you done this training with Essex,
I have.
Essex University? Thank you.
And you say at the very last part of paragraph 18, you're not aware of any specific training for older people who have a functional type of illness. Is that still your understanding?
That's true, yes.
Is it right that there are different pathways for those suffering with dementia on the one hand and functional mental illness on the other?
Yes, there are.
Are there patients with an ambiguous presentation?
Yes, they are.
And how does the service treat those people or seek to treat those people?
If we're talking about from an inpatient point of view, until a confirmed diagnosis of dementia is made, an older person who may require hospital care, they'll be offered care in a functional ward. So somebody who might have a suspected diagnosis of dementia, who has not yet had a diagnosis made, will be cared for in a functional ward. So the 5 functional adult wards probably will be caring for somebody at this moment in time who has probably got a diagnosis of dementia coming, hasn't yet been made because lots of different tests and diagnostics need to be made. But again, caring for a person that might be presenting with some level of confusion, probably, on a functional older adult ward, who will be caring for typical mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. It's a complex cohort of patients to be caring for, and caring for functional patients, or a traditional older person with a typical mental illness. There's no specific training for that. It's part of what either people have a professional interest in working in, or it is something that is learnt on the job as well. So caring for people with a functional illness is a very, from a nursing point of view, is a very much a traditional pathway, but there's no specific understanding of the fact that somebody who has comorbidities possibly might present with a confusional presentation, but might have a very clear physical reasons why they're presenting in that particular way. So it's mental health is quite a complex situation. Add in older situations, add in lots of things that might be reversible, is complex and can be quite tricky.
And is there a risk, therefore, that there is the wrong diagnosis or a functional illness is mistaken for dementia, or the other way around?
Potentially. But the fact that the teams are doing this on a day-by-day basis become very skilled, but there is always going to be that element of that being made. I'm not aware of that is the case, but I know that there will be probably, most of the functional wards will probably have a person probably waiting for a diagnosis of dementia to be made for. Doesn't mean that they should be moved to a dementia care ward straight away, but actually it's about understanding where that person sits and adding the complexities of caring for a dementia patient in a functional ward who might be presenting in a slightly confused or potentially unpredictable way is something that is not always widely understood. And I think it's important to just recognise that.
Moving forward slightly, under the heading of assessments in your statement, can we have on the screen paragraph 20? And again, chronologically, we're back into 2009, and then you move forward in your statement. 2009, you were the ward manager of Lucas Ward, and you say that NEPT had had structure set via the care programme approach, the CPA, and that it's a framework utilised across all mental health services that allow care and risk planning to occur both within community and inpatient services. And things it takes into account, I'm summarising, includes historical issues for the patient, current risks, levels of observation, underlying physical health considerations, manual handling issues, family connections, and thoughts for their loved ones in hospital. And you say these would be recorded on the patient administration system that at the time was Carebase, and that clinical staff and administration staff had access to that system. Would that include access for non-registered staff?
That's correct, yes.
But what about agency staff?
They would also have access as well.
And when you say they would have, did that always take place?
I can't recall a time where there would not have been a worker not being able to record onto Carebase. The fact that it's a very, very, very long time ago that we used Carebase, I'm not able to recall that, sorry. But at the time, I would not have been aware of anybody not being able to access Carebase to make records and put system entries in.
Using that as an example, or more generally, in practice, were both patient and family views always sought as part of assessment processes?
I would hope that it was at the time, particularly for people with dementia, or people who have got a cognitive impairment. The families and loved ones around them would be the experts, and actually for us to be able to provide a really good level of care for a person who's got a confused presentation or a dementia presentation, the clinical team would rely heavily on getting information from the family and loved ones to be able to offer a really good level of care and an individualised care plan for that particular person.
And were there any barriers to taking on family views, for example?
Not that I was aware of.
And you say later on at paragraph 22, we don't need to look at it on the screen, but it is there if you'd like to. You describe Lucas Ward at the time receiving complex presentation patients from Heneage and Bernard Ward. How in practice do the needs of complex patients, are they communicated to non-registered staff and agency staff?
The care plan would be predominantly the biggest driver for sharing of information. The care plan would also be discussed and looked at handovers. So at the time when Lucas Ward was operational, we had a 3-shift system. So we had early shifts, late shifts, and night shifts. So the handover and sharing information predominantly was done at these points of time in the day. And if there was an event such as an MDT or a care review or as a ward review where you have the MDT coming together, then if there were significant things that would need to be discussed that weren't urgent but needed to be discussed, there would be followed up and action there, and again shared via predominantly handover, which at that time was a three times a day occurrence.
I'm going to take you to a little bit later in your statement, page 6, paragraph 31, under the heading of admission. We don't need to necessarily see it on the screen, but just for those who are following. You, having worked in the community for a period of time from 2011, you returned to a blended role of clinical manager matron at the Crystal Centre in 2015. We've discussed what that consisted of in general terms already. You describe in paragraph 32 a move under NEPT in the mid-2010s from a traditional community mental health team approach, which is age-dependent, to a needs-problems approach, which was not age-related. And I think this is what you refer to as the Journeys programme. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And then at the end of paragraph 32, if I understand correctly, you say that SEPT followed the traditional CMHT age-exclusive approach, and that they may still do. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So within EPUT, there are two different approaches. Is that right?
In regard to community care, yes.
Yes. And are you aware of whether there's been evaluation undertaken to assess different outcomes for patient cohorts?
There may have been, but I'm not aware of that.
But it's not applicable in inpatient care.
No.
And if we can look at paragraph 34 on the screen, and again, I'm being reminded to slow down. So,
Apologies.
no, my issue as much as yours. If we look at paragraph 34, this is one of a few places in your statement where you talk about the sit rep and bed management and so on. So I'm not confining you to this paragraph, but this is where it first comes up, really. So this is back in 2015 in the Crystal Centre. You say there's no specific bed management sit rep calls, as NET did not operate an entire bed stock approach to community demand. Generally, localities such as Mid-Essex, North West Essex, and North East Essex worked independently in managing bed stock. And then you say after merger, so we're now into post-April 2017, there were management structure changes, and there was a much more integrated approach to the utilising of bed stock, starting with early morning telephone calls about bed availability by the bed management team. As a general impression, was a locally based bed stock approach easier to manage, better for patients? Are you able to say?
There are two strands. It would make the individual localities aware of the demand to think about actually how, if there is ways that we can be creative with the bed stock that we've got. So if a patient theoretically is in Chelmsford and needed a bed in, let's say, the Crystal Centre on Ruby Ward, it'll be up to the team to think about if there's ways that we can safely generate some discharges for a patient to come into. If there wasn't the ability to do that, then the ability to lean on other parts of the organisation, if there was any other capacity elsewhere, would be helpful. The flip side is the fact that if you are asking a patient to come from Harwich to go all the way over to Epping to go to a mental health bed in Epping, it's a very long distance for the loved ones and families to get to. But if the clinical risk for that patient is requiring a hospital bed and there was a bed identified, then the ability to use a trust-wide approach to bed management offers the ability to offer a bit more of a timely response with the forefront of thinking of how can a patient be offered a bed in their own locality as quickly as possible.
At paragraph 38, you describe effectively the development of the sit-rep bed management calls to morning and afternoon, and a trust-wide 12:30 sit-rep call to review clinical demand and expected discharges from the wards. And you describe that there's input from, or representation from inpatient services, community, and also urgent care teams. And at paragraph 39, patients who were deemed necessary for admission but without an immediate bed available the SITREP call usually offers mitigation that a community service will continue to support until a bed is identified and vacant. How does that work in practice?
So if a identified patient was requiring a hospital bed for a mental health bed, and there wasn't one ideally located in the vicinity or inside the entire organisation, the conversation on the call would look at what are the current risks for that particular patient. Are there other mitigations that we can put in place until a bed can be identified? So, for example, a patient who might be under the care of a crisis team or a home treatment team, and their risks have changed to the point they are now requiring inpatient stay. In regards to thinking about what other mitigation can be put in place, doesn't solely just sit with a home treatment team. A community team, a care coordinator would still be expected to offer a timely intervention to a patient in a state of urgency, and the home treatment team might also be expected to increase the interventions that they're offering as an alternative to try and offer a holding ability for that person till a bed does become available. And sometimes, depending on the risks that the person's presenting with, the SITREP calls would look at whether a request for a private bed would be clinically justifiable for a person to go into, which does happen, and it happens to this very day for EPA at the moment with our 3 times a day SITREP calls, and that decision is made by everybody participating in the calls at that moment in time.
Again, we'll try and slow down a little.
Apologies.
And the same issue comes up several times in your statement, both under admission and discharge. But if there's monitoring of who needs admission, who might be able to be discharged, isn't there a danger that there's both bed pressure on people not being admitted when they should be, but also potentially being discharged too soon?
The decision to admit and the decision to discharge will be clinically based decisions. What's called the flow, such as discharges for the organisation, is a constant pressure that the organisation jostles with on a day throughout the entire day. I am aware that there is conversations about offering people discharges, but I'm not aware of conversations where people have been discharged in order to create a bed for somebody else to come into, solely on the fact that there is a significant demand in the community to generate a discharge for someone else to come into. Discharges, I would hope, are clinically made at the right time for the right patient, not solely to generate a discharge to allow an admission to come in.
And where you say at paragraph 43, over time, the SITREP call has evolved to have much more clinical oversight by the expanded patient flow team and senior attendants to assist with decision-making. The suggestion there is that there may have been a lack of clinical oversight in earlier iterations of managing patient flow.
Quite possibly.
And has the setup perhaps not involved the right mix of representative groups?
Are you talking prior, when it was first set up?
Well, I'm trying to understand what you say at paragraph 43, because you tell me that over time, the SITREP call is involved to have much more clinical oversight. I'm wondering, what was the absence?
Initially, my experience of the SITREP calls, predominantly there were solely bed management colleagues who have an admin background looking at where the bed stocks were. So if there was a bed available in Colchester and there was a patient in Chelmsford who needed a bed, they would find that bed for that person to go into. over time has progressed is actually thinking about the clinical presentation for a patient to come in, what is the clinical mix on a ward at a particular time, are there significant demands in one area in comparison to another area. So rather than relying on admin colleagues to help generate a resolution for us clinical staff, there's much more clinical oversight of actually where patients are best placed in the most safest way inside EPA and possibly outside of EPA as well. So rather than an administrator finding saying there's a bed on Gosfield Ward at Colchester, actually there might be reasons why a patient might be best off placed somewhere else inside the organisation as well. And that clinical oversight is made by people that are working in the flow and capacity team, and they do that on a day-by-day basis.
Can I just be clear? Can you recall instances where there might be previously, where there might have been no clinical oversight of some of that decision making?
Off the top of my head, I don't think so, because actually predominantly, even when the SITREP calls were initiated, there were clinical staff that were on the calls always making the decisions. And I probably have been, I've been privy to lots of those kind of conversations myself.
So it's a case of not enough as opposed to not any.
That's correct, ma'am.
And perhaps just one last question on this topic at this time. In your paragraph 47, you say you're aware that there is guidance of levels of what the levels of care are needed in the interim time for when a bed is identified as needed and then accessible. But in your role, you're unfamiliar on the scoring tools that the flow and capacity team use to identify the most urgent patients needing admission. So is that because it's outside of your remit?
That's the ability to score and level a patient's clinical risk and demand, that's something that the bed management team do with the people that are requesting admission in the first place. That might be home treatment team, it might be a community care coordinator or somewhere in the urgent pathway, or somebody who's even waiting to be detained under the Mental Health Act.
And are you able to tell me anything about how that tool's been developed or quality assured for
I can't tell you the
reasons?
detail with that, I'm afraid, sorry.
And the way, as I read your statement, it's the focus is significantly on patients within patients being admitted to EPUT wards. It doesn't talk about out-of-area placements. They happen, as I understand it. How is that factored in at this SITREP or something else?
So the number of patients placed in a private bed is not the best experience for anybody. They might be placed potentially quite a long distance away, not always. There are private hospitals in Essex. But the number of patients that are in the private sector is discussed at the SITREP calls. It's discussed every day. I don't know if it's discussed 3 times a day, but I know that the number of patients that are that have been placed in the private bed are discussed as part of the SITREP detail and is monitored with the overall aim to try and reduce that down. But it's something that the organisation is aware of on a daily basis.
Before we take our first break, I just wanted to ask you a few questions under the heading of ward environment. Not at this stage about Oxyvision, but some questions about physical ward environment issues. It seems that back in 2009, one of the main concerns as ward manager of Lucas was a risk of falls. Is that fair?
That's very, very true, yes.
And you can't recall whether ligature concerns were part of the risk assessments at NEPT at that time? But come November 2015, when you moved to the Crystal Centre, as I understand it, you were aware that there had been a ligature incident on the Ruby ward before your arrival. Is that fair?
That's true, yes.
And you say you vaguely recall ward-based ligature risk assessments pre-EPUT, but they became more formalised when EPUT was created. Is that a fair summary of your understanding?
Yes, that's true.
And I take it from your statement that you accept there's a responsibility for someone in your role to ensure that wards remained as ligature risk reduced as is possible, but you seek to emphasise that there's a balance to be struck with making an area as comfortable as possible. Is that right?
That's true, yes.
And do you recognise there's a potential tension there?
That's correct, yes.
And is it something that there can be consistency about, or is there a strive for consistency, or is there an element of discretion there?
The consistency is definitely being applied to my time prior to working for MSE. Heneage Ward had a significant refresh and replacement furniture, which was well due for last year. The furniture that was replaced, particularly the dining furniture, was of a reduced ligature design, which helps reduce the overall issue for ligature for furniture. But the furniture is incredibly heavy and designed to be very heavy and not very easily moved. But you might have older people that might not have as good core strength to be able to try and move a chair around is a complex aspect to try and offer them on a day-by-day basis. It's a balancing act to get ligature-reduced furniture without also giving people who might not have the strength to be able to not move furniture around. It sounds strange, but it's quite complicated to move a chair from 2 inches from one side of a table to another. But it's something that is being applied to all aspects of EPUT wards.
And before we break, if I may, I just want to try and better understand the evidence you give about motion sensors and so on. You tell us in your statement, paragraph 58, there was assistive technology in bedrooms to help mitigate unwitnessed falls that had been noted on the entire trust at the time. So we're talking about November 2015 to perhaps November 2017, that part of your statement. So there were mattress sensors, is that right?
That's correct.
There were sensors on the floors to detect when somebody had put their weight on the floor.
That's correct.
And there were edge of bed sensors as well.
That's correct, yes.
And these were, I just want to clarify, these were not part of Oxyvision, these were a different physical
Absolutely, yes.
assistive
It's not part of
technology.
Oxyvision at all.
And then in that context, when you describe in a couple of parts of your statement about there being a key that can turn these off or on, does that cover all of the assistive technology that I've just described?
So there will be a control on the outside of a patient's bedroom. So if somebody is at a higher risk of falls, the technology would be switched on and off by a controller box outside a patient's bedroom. So if somebody who had no risk of falls and didn't need any falls equipment to be turned on, then that bedroom wouldn't be activated as such to be, quote, on for a falls risk. So it gave you the ability to turn an individual bedroom on for warning systems for falls risks and off as a falls risk as well. So it was not part of Oxyvision. It's not tied into that system at all.
You give evidence that I'll come back to about, or I made of it very briefly now actually. You give evidence about a part of Oxyvision that was an edge of bed sensor, and I think you distinguished that And I think it's that was, not your words, my words, oversensitive.
That's correct, yes.
And might cause alarm fatigue.
That's correct, yes.
But that's distinct. All right. Madam Chair, I think that's a convenient moment to take a break.
How long would you like?
For the purpose of the transcriber, I think we're at 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Mr. Arthur, just before we restart, we'll both keep an eye on our speed and perhaps pausing during longer answers, which I may have elicited, just to give everyone a chance to hear what you're saying and to make sure that the recording and transcript are accurate. I'm going to take you to paragraph 77 of your statement, page 14. The heading is treatment, which starts back on page 12. The first section is significantly about older adults, which we've touched on already. And as I understand the structure of your statement, paragraph 77 onwards is about emotionally unstable personality disorder and or borderline personality disorder, and the potential challenges dealing with that in an inpatient setting. You describe at paragraph 80 how it appears in two places, both at paragraph 79 and 81. You say that ward-based psychologists are readily available to compile a formulation for the clinical presentation with recommendations made for further community-based therapy when clinically indicated. And at paragraph 80, you describe, as I understand it, that there's been a shift towards wards having their own dedicated individual professionals, so including psychological, psychologists in particular, both to help staff and presumably in the assistance provided to patients and service users.
That's correct.
But the question after that long introduction is, are there enough psychologists to, either on an inpatient basis or, to your knowledge, in the community, to deliver what is needed?
From my professional point of view, the ward, having a individual ward-based cohort of professionals to look after that ward has been a significant increase in a level of input that probably wasn't there 15 years ago on the inpatient wards. Is it sufficient is probably a question that you might need to ask AHP colleagues themselves directly. My suspicion is the fact that they probably would say no, they probably would require more increased input, which would probably benefit both community and inpatient services.
And the general impression from your statement is that patients with EUPD present challenges. There's a tension between what what can be done on an inpatient basis and what maybe ought to be done in the community. How do you resolve that in practice?
At some point, every single patient will be discharged back to a service that isn't an inpatient setting. Predominantly, most patients go back home. So the conversation about looking at what a safe discharge looks like...
Hang on.
Sorry.
Slow down.
Beg your pardon, ma'am. Sorry. There will always be a tension between community and inpatient discharges for people that are quite complex, with particularly with an AUPD type or a personality disorder diagnosis. It's very a discharge shouldn't be dependent on whether there's a delay in something happening on an inpatient ward or a community setting at the same time. So the question in regards to ask a question again so I can answer it best, please.
I was asking what the challenges were between inpatient care versus community care. I can rephrase it this way with the benefit of part of your statement at paragraph 82 to 84. Paragraph 82, you say the ability for mental health services to make a judgment call for a person presenting with severe emotional dysregulation, but the need to offer care within the community is a day-to-day clinical decision that MDTs make each and every day. There is a significant evidence that this cohort of patient group have a poor experience with an inpatient setting, develop other poor coping strategies, and increase impulsive, self-harming behaviours. To give the question some focus, what if there are threats of self-harm or suicide whilst an inpatient, but otherwise potentially on the way to discharge?
That's a real risk that the teams manage on a day-by-day basis. And I doubt very much that if there's any inpatient teams that are not having that conversation probably today with all the inpatient wards, with a situation where a patient might be making a threat to them themselves if they are going to be discharged of an inpatient setting. It's a really complicated, risky situation that teams work constantly on to think about what actually is in the patient's best interest and what is the risk that would be if a person who was expressing that level of thought, what are the mitigating factors that community services and colleagues can offer to allow a safe discharge to occur. Patients do say at point of discharge and make suggestion that they're going to end their life at point of discharge, and that's something that teams have to manage as best as they can do with the situation that they're presenting with, knowing what the situation that the person, that individual, that patient, whether their level of impulsivity or not, or it's really complicated, and it's something that teams have to manage on a day-by-day basis and will constantly have to manage going forward for future.
This ties in with a paragraph under the next heading, which is medication, but I think it's a more general point. If you can look at paragraph 94, please. And perhaps we can have that on the screen. So I think this relates to patient flow that we discussed earlier, and also to what may be happening with an individual patient. So that whilst the paragraph starts talking about prescriptions, the bulk of the paragraph it is about red to green meetings. They're described as daily MDT meetings to ensure that there is a purpose for a patient being in hospital. Green days where there is a purpose. A red day is where there is no purpose for the patient to remain on the ward. After 3 consistent red days, the MDT should discuss what needs to occur to either gain purpose or consider what the delay to discharge could be. Do you accept that in mental health conditions, which are prone to fluctuation, 3 days may be a relatively short period in which to draw meaningful conclusions about readiness for discharge?
Red to green is part of the discharge plan process. So 3 red days could be the fact that someone hasn't exhausted or that a resolution for accommodation hasn't been reached, it doesn't mean the fact that that person, just because they've reached 3 red days, is going to be immediately discharged from a hospital setting. It's to highlight the fact that an achievement for a person towards a discharge hasn't been achieved. So whilst it's not solely a consideration for discharge, it's to highlight the fact that there needs to be some movement and purpose for someone's admission to help them achieve what a discharge might look like.
So it's a tool rather
It is a
than
tool.
a predictor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next section, headed transfer, starting on page 17, paragraph 100. You give an example, for example, of internal transfer, for example, Peter Brough to Ardley, discussion in a sit-rep call, and you say the wards will undertake a telephone conversation to understand risks, and a handover sheet will be completed and sent to the receiving ward in preparation for the transfer. I mean, that's what should happen, but does that always happen?
Yes, my expectation it would be.
You mention at paragraph 101 decisions, there's been changes over the years. I can recall decisions being made without individual wards being involved or consulted with. When did that change? Is there a particular point in time that things improved or changed?
I cannot recall. I'm sorry, I can't recall when that was.
Do you, you were asked as part of your statement, you were shown a list of illustrative cases and responded much later in your statement to those names that you recognised. You don't mention Bethany Lilly. Does that name ring a bell?
It does.
And she was on Peter Brough ward at various points, as I understand matters, in 2016, 2017, and then in November 2018, December 2018, into early January 2019, and then 9th of January 2019 to the 15th of January 2019. Peter Brough was under your responsibility at that time.
That's correct.
Without going into all the details, there came an occasion when Beth went to A&E and then wasn't able to come back to Peter Brough, and there was a transfer to Thorpe ward. Do you know about that?
Bethany's care was prior to my time taking over the matron responsibility for Peter Brough, but I am aware of the case.
And one of the criticisms in her case was that the transfer to Thorpe ward on the 15th of January, there wasn't a risk assessment, an inventory, an escort, and no communication was received about the level of observations required. Do you have direct knowledge of recommendations in the RCA report, for example?
I'm aware of some of the recommendations.
And would you have had a role in implementing the recommendations?
Yes.
So, when I asked about what should happen and what maybe didn't always happen, do you accept that there are examples where best practice or expected practice in terms of ward transfer doesn't happen.
Sorry, I didn't hear the response to that
Sorry,
question.
yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So I'm just pausing for a moment, Chair. I'm going to take you forward in your statement to the section of discharge, page 22, paragraph 136. And we've touched upon discharge already, but I just want to clarify paragraph 136 with you. In paragraph 136, you say two things. First of all, discharge planning should occur prior to any patient being admitted, and that wards plan discharge at point of admission to ensure that the patient, carer, loved ones, and other clinical teams involved in the person's care work towards an expected discharge date. Is that the same thing, or are those two different things? So pre-admission and point of admission?
They're the same.
And from your point of view, managing inpatient unit, at the point of admission, or is there work that's been done that you can base your assessments on?
Oh, yes, there are.
And if you look at paragraph 138 on the same page, you say, I'm unaware of any factors that were beyond my control that impacted on the discharge plans for patients. Over the page at paragraph 139, you identify, for example, the sort of considerations that might be taken in mind: appropriate community support, the availability of clinically needed home treatment teams, suitable accommodation if needed. Help me understand this. Some of those factors will be beyond your control as an inpatient ward manager. So they must be impacting upon the discharge plan for patients.
If the most common ability for discharging planning for patients generally is accommodation, it tends to be something that is a barrier for a discharge to occur in a safe and timely manner. Some patients that come in might already be homeless, or some might actually become homeless whilst they come in hospital. So that is one of the biggest barriers to the ability to achieve discharge in a timely fashion, and that happens very frequently throughout probably all inpatient wards at some point.
So how do I understand, with the benefit of that answer, how do I understand your evidence that there clearly are things outside of your control, but they're managed as part of discharge?
So I'll go to homelessness as an example. Prior to COVID, I was very unfamiliar with patients being discharged to bed and breakfast accommodation. So that is something that happens much more frequently now. If due to the fact that councils have difficulty in managing their own issues regarding homelessness, to allow a patient to be discharged safely, we are using temporary accommodation in a bed and breakfast manner in a much more frequent process now for the organisation. It might have happened prior to COVID, prior to 2020. I don't remember it happening very often at all, but that is actually a route for allowing a patient who is clinically ready for discharge to be discharged out of a mental health bed, who is safe to be discharged out of a mental health bed. That's probably one of the more recent examples I can describe to allow... Sorry, ma'am.
But presumably that causes delay, the fact that there is not somewhere to
Yes.
go immediately and you have to think about alternatives, and one of those is bed and breakfast.
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I think.
Thank you. I want to touch briefly upon matters under the heading of safety in your statement, starting at page 25, but paragraph 159 in particular. The context here is emergency events such as a patient ligaturing and the emergency call system being activated. What I'm particularly interested in at this stage is at paragraph 159, where you say that the EPUT training department undertakes yearly emergency response drills on each inpatient ward, I presume.
That's correct.
Are they planned, or are they like a fire drill that they just get announced?
They are unannounced. The ward manager may be, the ward manager will be aware that the team are coming to do a training session, but the clinical team on shift will not be aware of a planned scenario-based situation.
Is annual sufficient?
It will be an assessment on the time. I am aware of one of my clinical team's, Heneage Ward's, response was not satisfactory on one occasion, and the team came back and did further unplanned scenario-based situations to allow the team to become much more competent and offer a much better response for the next planned, unscheduled visits. Yearly is the trust standard at this moment in time, but can be made more frequent if needed. So if a manager or a clinician wanted a more frequent response, they can contact the team to make that happen, but yearly is the minimum.
How long ago was it that Heneage needed the addition?
Off the top of my head, I think it was around about 2 or 3 years ago. I can't recall.
Can you describe some of the scenario-based situations that might be the subject of one of these?
It's a CPR drill. A patient's found unresponsive, and the team are expected then to work on a there'll be a resus dummy in a bedroom, and the patient, the team that are on shift will be expected to undertake a full CPR resuscitation on the dummy to be able to demonstrate their response levels.
Madam Chair, if you're ready, I'll move on to a separate topic, Oxyvision, which we skirted earlier. You tell us at paragraph 184 on page 30 that you were the matron for Peter Brough Ward in 2020 when the team was identified as a pilot area for Oxyvision, and that Peter Brough was a number of wards identified within EPUT to ascertain if there was a lesser restrictive option to care for people in a safe manner than without this technology. Does that reflect your understanding of the reason for the pilot?
It does. I wanted to make sure if Peterborough was going to be the pilot area that this was going to be truly assistive technology, not to replace nursing interventions. And with the rollout of Oxyvision, that became very clear that was the case. It was to assist nurses, not to replace us.
And how did you gain that understanding?
Through the work streams that the ward team were initially invited to, and conversations with the internal organisation as well, to offer myself and the team reassurance that this was to assist the team and certainly not to replace nursing hours with technology.
But what about, so that's one thing, nursing hours, but actually the nuts and bolts of what a system could do and how that might affect the job. Did you have similar reassurances in that respect?
The actual ability to offer patients a lesser intrusive way of caring for them is how the Oxyvision conversation was had for me and the team for Peterborough.
And
it was much more about an enhancement to providing them a much more lesser intrusive way of caring for them.
What did you, at that time, understand would be less intrusive? Comparing what and what?
So, offering levels of observations that are what the organisation would call level 3 and level 4, they are within eyesight or as a very bare minimum, or sometimes within arm sight, depending on what a risk of a patient might be presenting with at any one time. So with that in mind, the ability to offer a level of safety for patients without having the need to constantly observe somebody is a much more caring way of caring for a patient, rather than having the constant need to provide a person with them at any one time. The idea is myself, when understanding when Oxyvision was being thought about for the trust, was about the assistiveness of it and the ability to offer care in a much more caring way, rather than constantly having somebody walk with you all day, every day, which is restricted by its very nature and very intrusive.
Were you consulted on whether Peterborough should be part of the pilot, or was it announced?
I think it was probably announced, but given the fact that Peterborough was always one of the 2 assessment units for the trust, and to have something to provide an enhanced level of care for patients, I wasn't adverse to that happening on Peterborough.
You've just talked about it offering the opportunity of not having to observe someone all the time. In what way do you think it is relieving that obligation? When is it being used which would otherwise require you, without it, to be observing somebody?
All patients that are on observations at some point will come off an enhanced level of observation, such as level 3 or level 4. They will recover to the point they can come off. To be able to do that is a risky decision process that the team will make. Prior to the use of Oxyvision, it was based on the team's ability to offer themselves assurance that a patient was able to keep themselves safe without the need to constantly observe them. With the use of Oxyvision, there was an added layer of the ability to care for a patient who might be still unpredictable, but not be as intrusive with the restrictions of having one-to-one care provided by them via level 3 or level 4 observation.
So, in other words, using it as an observation tool, Oxyvision, but less obtrusively than intrusively than somebody sitting with someone all
Absolutely,
the time.
yes, ma'am. It's less
And
having-
is that how you understood it was going to be used?
in the fact that it would offer people who are in a bedroom, predominantly because that's the only place that the Oxyvision is in, that it would be a less intrusive way to offer somebody who doesn't need level 3 observations, but still potentially might be unpredictable still with their impulsivity, to give us an added layer of assurance that somebody can be offered care for in a less restrictive way.
And that is how, as you understand it, it is used and has been
Yes,
used.
yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Did the introduction of Oxyvision change, for example, staff making visual checks on patients at various times of the day?
For Peterborough, it did, which is not the way that it should have been followed at the, when it was being rolled out.
And the context of that is, can you explain the context of your answer?
There was an incident that occurred on Peterborough, forgive me of my time frames, 2021, where it came to light that the team were offering care for patients for observations via Oxyvision and not undertaking visual checks in patients' bedrooms.
And is this what you discuss, for example, at paragraph 194 of your statement, just to check that we are that it's the same example or a different example?
Yes.
You and in particular, you say after the death of Mr. Steele on Peterborough ward, the ward manager and I discussed the need to shift the team's recordings from observed to a culture of engaging with the patients and being more descriptive in the notes they record.
That's correct, yes.
So there's a few things there. There's reliance on perhaps looking at Oxyvision monitor rather than physically going into somebody's room.
That's correct.
There's the record keeping point. So if someone just records observed, that doesn't tell you very much.
That's correct.
So you were encouraging a more descriptive account of what was observed,
That's correct, yes.
and reinforcing that there should, for example, in this instance, be a physical in the bedroom visual check.
Opening a door, going in and checking, yes.
The implication, I think, from paragraph 194 is that the sight lines into the bedrooms weren't very good. Is that right?
For some bedrooms, that's correct, yes.
Reinforcing perhaps the need to go into the room.
That's correct, yes.
Just going back slightly in time, in terms of the pilot, did you understand pilot as meaning trying something out for the first time, or this is the first time we'll try something we've already decided we'll use? Is it implementation, trial implementation?
Peterborough was one of the first trials for the entire organisation. Pilot, sorry, beg your pardon.
And you say that you helped co-produce the standard operating procedure. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
How did that process work?
The team that were helped setting it up for the company that Oxyvision is, in the middle of COVID, set up online Teams meetings to help look at conversations with the various sites inside EPUT that were piloting Oxyvision, and looking at what the procedure would look like. So it was made with myself and other team members inside Peterborough, but also people inside the organisation looking at generating a standard operating procedure for the entire organisation. So it was a real collaborative approach for to look at what the policy might look like. Oxyvision was not something that was very familiar to me and to the entire organisation. So we're looking at using people who might have a better understanding of what it actually was to look at a good procedure as it was at the time.
And how did you try and make sure there was a good procedure? Who were you able to speak to or speak with?
Zeph was one of the people that was helped co-produce the procedure.
So internal or external?
Both.
Both.
So
okay.
predominantly.
I'm not asking you for names,
Sorry.
but okay, so it was internal and external. So other trusts who had experience?
I cannot recall if there were other trusts. I am fairly confident that Oxyvision Company was there as part of the development of the SOPs. And if I vaguely recall, I think we had some SOPs from standard operating procedures from other trusts as well to reference to what they had used in relation to implementation for Oxyvision.
So documentation rather than liaison?
Yes.
Okay. You highlight within your statement, paragraph 188, that when Oxyvision was rolled out to Peterborough and Ardley wards, who were under the same senior management structure, in spring 2020, the issue of consent was not specifically considered or referred to. Do you accept that that was an oversight or a failing?
Absolutely, yes.
We've already touched upon earlier, before the break, an element of the Oxyvision system, which you said, in terms of the edge of bed, which gave rise to the risk of alarm fatigue. Can you see other risks with Oxyvision about over-reliance on technology or on what you're shown on a screen rather than physical interaction?
As I said earlier, Oxyvision helped very clearly come to me as it's an assistive part of what I do as a nurse. It's not there to replace me. So if I have concerns or gut instinct that something might not be right, then I would expect myself and the team to be able to respond to that. Oxyvision is there to assist me. It's not there to replace the nuances of nursing. I would hope that people don't overtly rely on Oxyvision for everything regarding what mental health nursing is about.
But is that risk there?
Potentially.
But you have already said to me that you think it offers somebody who doesn't need level 3 observations, still might be unpredictable with their impulsivity, and it gives you an added layer of assurance. What assurance does it give you? It's got alerts regarding older people on edges of beds. It's got alerts for bathrooms and doors. But is it also giving you assurance by just allowing you to zap into somebody's room and see how they're doing?
It can do both.
And is that what it is used for in your trust?
I would hope that it's used for its intended purpose of actually, if there is a situation that alerts us being the care team, that something's happening that shouldn't be happening in a patient's bedroom, that it's checked, rather than using it as a checking device. It's there to alert us when something is going not the way it should be. So it might be picking up somebody's oxygen saturations changing or the rest being unusual, as opposed to a checking mechanism.
But you suggest it might be being used as a checking?
Possibly.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, given the timings, I'm going to move on to subject of staffing briefly. I'm taking you to page 34, paragraph 209 of your statement. Briefly earlier, you talked about the shift pattern. I think at an earlier point in your career, in paragraph 209, you're describing, I think, the more recent position of there being long day and long night shifts.
That's correct.
And that's the general rule. There are exceptions, but that's the general rule, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
And does that have an effect on the ability of staff to maintain care standards, to maintain compassion?
A 12.5-hour period of time is a very long period of time. I believe probably most NHS organisations do a long day and long night shift pattern, but they are incredibly long. The ability to remain fresh and composed after a 12.5-hour, potentially very complicated shift is that much more difficult for long shifts. But they are, I believe most NHS organisations do long shift patterns. But the ability to feel tired at the end of a shift is very real.
Do you think it's safe?
It's very tiring, ma'am.
Do you think it's safe?
I'm glad I'm slightly older in my career. I don't know long days and long nights. Short shifts have their complications as well, but they are very long.
And just a couple of paragraphs below, whilst we're there, in summary, to paragraph 211, you describe the disruption, effectively, of temporary staff if they're unfamiliar with where they're working and working patterns. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
I want to touch upon supervision and performance management. That's the heading in your statement. A couple of points. At paragraph 228, you say that clinical non-management supervision for nurses has always been optional, and that you've rarely taken it up, and currently unaware of any nurse that undertakes clinical supervision. Is there a missed opportunity there?
Possibly. For most other professions, they have protected, dedicated time for non-mandatory supervision. Nurses don't, and that's been historical, I think.
So, whilst you say it's optional and you've rarely taken it up, underlying that, would you take it up, or would it be good if it was more readily available or mandated?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you describe, and I'm not seeking to identify the manager, but you had the same effectively long-term line manager from, I think, 2015 or 2016 up until 2022 with the break that you described earlier. But then it appears that things have changed. You describe in paragraph 232. So that senior staff you now describe as remote and disengaged with the structure below them, that you don't have one-to-ones at your grade or above, and appraisals are not completed. And you've had several line managers who are disinterested, remote, and who wanted less than once a week contact with you. And you've raised this as an issue with limited actions or response to your concerns. Is this... It's more than one individual you're talking about, so it sounds like it's a systemic problem. Is that fair?
I've had conversations after, prior to me going on to my secondment. I would not say it's a systemic issue. I think it was my experience at the time. But I don't work for Freeport at this moment in time.
Yes, because of your secondment. I have some general questions to ask you about investigations you've undertaken. This appears at a couple of different parts of your statement. Firstly, at paragraph 250, and then more specifically on the last page of your statement. So just starting at page 42, just for context, this is when you were shown a list of illustrative cases and you identified that you had undertaken the root cause analysis investigation for Sharon Kelly in 2019 and that you undertook the PSIRF investigation for Joshua Leader in 2020 and also an RCA for W8. And you say at paragraph 270, you did not encounter any barrier to complete the reports needed. Keeping that in mind, I want you to turn back to paragraph 250, just so I can better understand your evidence. If you give a description of having undertaken various investigations in the past, including HR related. But if it was, for example, a root cause analysis report, the patient safety team would determine the terms of reference. And then you describe the process. At paragraph 254, the first sentence suggests that your experience was effectively gained by undertaking investigations rather than training. Am I right about that?
Yes.
And then where you say training to undertake investigations is part of an individual's own learning and development plan, what does that mean? Does that mean that now there is specific training that is given, but it wasn't when you started investigation?
Very true, yes.
Do you also provide training personally or not?
No.
And in terms of briefly touching upon the examples that you've offered of investigations that you've undertaken, or more generally, if that provides a better basis for answering the question, with an RCA, in what are there examples where you've had a connection with the matters under investigation, either in terms of personal relationships with those involved, or it being on your ward, or part of the history being on your ward?
On the whole, no. The investigations are tried to be as neutral as you possibly can do. My RCA's PSIRF investigations that referred to were asked for me to be, I was commissioned to do them as I was as impartial as I possibly could do. I was not aware of the community services and the colleagues and the patient at all in all of these situations.
And do you think you're able to maintain that independence when it's your own trust, colleagues, even if they're not close colleagues?
I would hope so, but it's an own organisation investing its own work. The impartiality should be there, but I can't always say that it will always be the case.
A related point is in respect of Sharon Kelly, where part of the focus was care given in the community. If you hadn't worked in the community for a good number of years, does that put you too far away from what the issues in practice might have been?
Potentially, possibly, yes.
Were you aware that, albeit briefly, Sharon had been admitted to the Peterborough ward and the Ardley ward in May 2019, when it was under your responsibility?
I don't believe I had matron responsibility at that point in time prior to her admission to Peterborough.
You give evidence generally and also specifically in respect of investigations of the importance of taking into account families' concerns. Do you think you did that in respect of Sharon Kelly and Joshua Leader?
Yes.
Did you meet with them, or was that family liaison who met with them?
Both. So with Sharon Kelly's family, I met with them face to face. It was before COVID and the lockdowns, and the other investigation I met online with the family on a number of occasions, again with the Flow family liaison officer.
And in respect of Joshua Leader, the family provided a document with matters to effectively bring to EPUT's attention, which you consider in the report you wrote, but their overall sense is that their recommendations weren't fully taken on board. Is that something you acknowledge, or is it difficult to answer in these circumstances?
It's difficult to answer.
And in respect of generally, but these two cases as examples, if there are inquests and potentially prevention of future death reports, would they come to your knowledge as the person who had done either the RCA or the PSI?
Not the PFDs wouldn't come to me. They'll go to the team that they are a relation to. So if there was a notification that come to the organisation, that would then be shared as an outcome for the actual inquest hearing. Wouldn't necessarily be part of the investigation process that the trust is undertaking.
So if you're investigating either in an RCA or a PSI, at what point does your role end?
Once the investigation has been signed off, that generally would be the end part of the investigatory process. If, for example, I was called to inquest in January for an investigation I did last year, so whilst the investigation part is finished, there might be some other aspect of the investigation that I might be called to, and this example was me having to go to inquest to go through the report with the coroner.
I'm just going to pause for a moment. We are coming up to 4:30. I'm just going to double check whether I have any further questions at this stage. Madam Chair, whilst I'm doing that, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have one question I want to ask. It's about paragraph 213. You talk about patients who have comorbidities on older adult wards, but not exclusively older adult wards, who have increased demand upon who make an increasing demand upon the nurse's time, and you refer to not just medication rounds and attending at acute hospitals with them, but also the nursing needs that they might have, and we can think what those might be: feeding and washing, and along with all the other mobility issues that they might have. That strikes me as a very significant increase in the workload. Do you think that staffing levels have fairly reflected the demands of older adult wards with large numbers of people with comorbidities?
My professional experience, probably since 2009, the levels of nursing time that are being offered to patients has significantly increased to help mitigate the fact that actually the cohort patients that we looked after in 2009 to the level of dependency that are present now is very different, with the fact that there is much more dependency for things that you've alluded to, such as washing, feeding, and those kind of things. If at this moment in time, what was some of my older adult wards had a higher level of dependency, the ability to access extra staffing hours is much more easily available, depending on the demand at that one moment in time. So if there is a patient, probably for the adult wards as well, who is generating a lot more level of dependency, then the organisation's ability to respond to that in a much more timely fashion is there. And there are processes now set in place that allow the extra demand that might be coming out of a clinical area to be discussed, understood, and if it need be, agreed extra staffing for a 24-hour period.
And would that... So are you suggesting to me that it's not always been that happy a relationship?
Absolutely not.
In the past?
Absolutely not.
In the quite recent past? This
probably prior to COVID, possibly. Since COVID, the ability to access short notice staff is much more easily available. But there needs to be a very clear understanding about what that demand might look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this stage. We'll take a break. There may be some further questions. Madam, 15 minutes?
I'm happy with this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Councillor.
Madam Chair, we've received a few supplementary questions arising from the evidence given before the break. Mr. Arthur, you were asked earlier about out-of-area placements, and your answer focused on placements to private providers. Are you also familiar with out-of-area placements to other NHS trusts?
Short answer is no. I'm not aware of EPUT patients being in other mental health provider beds. There might be patients waiting to come in from a 136 suite somewhere, perhaps, but I don't know of any EPUT patients being placed in other general mental health beds.
So your experience of out-of-area is private provision?
Solely, yes.
Notwithstanding your answer before, so covering the private providers, based on your evidence, who retained responsibility for oversight of a patient's care, discharge planning, liaison with family members during such placements?
There are dedicated individuals inside the organisation that look at patients placed in the private sector. So there are people in the discharge and flow team that look at patients who are placed in a private bed to see what arrangements need to either be made to bring them back to an EPUT bed when it becomes available, or what other arrangements need to be put into place to support a discharge for them to go back home straight from a private bed. That will also include the community care coordinator, and there are, say, named people inside the flow and capacity team that undertake that role as well. So the fact that a patient's in a private bed, the EPUT still look at what needs to occur to achieve a discharge or transfer back to an EPUT bed.
A different topic, we discussed earlier accommodation being a barrier to discharge. Those are my words, not your words. Are there circumstances in which EPUT funds B&B accommodation for patients in the circumstances discussed earlier?
Say that again, sorry.
Are there circumstances in which EPUT funds B&B accommodation for patients?
Yes, and that funding comes from, as I believe it to be, from the ICBs, so to look at helping to unblock a safe discharge that can occur just because someone hasn't got a home to go to. EPUT, I'm aware of that they will fund an interim bed and breakfast accommodation to the local authority or whichever council it might be to look at the resolution for the homelessness situation. So EPUT will fund, I've known people to be funded a week's bed and breakfast accommodation until the local authority have the ability to respond to processing that person's accommodation application.
And what processes are there in place to ensure that the B&B accommodation is safe and suitable for the patient?
So that again will be part of the conversation that the patient's ward that they're on at that moment in time. They'll be making sure that if a patient's discharge is feasible and it's safe for that person to go in bed and breakfast accommodation, that will be a conversation that the ward will have pre to that person being discharged. It's not, everybody's not going to be discharged to bed and breakfast accommodation because it's not safe for them to be doing so, but there will be a number of patients that can, once they've achieved recovery or good stabilisation of mental health, they can go into temporary accommodation. So that does happen, but it's dependent on the risks and what the next step might look like for that person post going to bed and breakfast accommodation as well.
Changing the subject again, back to Oxyvision. We discussed the standard operating procedure, the SOP. Was there a template provided by OxHealth at the time of the pilot? You made reference to other trusts' documentation, for example, but was there a template provided to you by the provider of Oxyvision?
I don't believe there was one. I can't recall, is probably a more accurate answer.
In response to a question from the chair, you said that Oxyvision might pick up on someone's oxygen saturations changing. Is that a capability of Oxyvision?
Is that a capability? Yes, it is. So Oxyvision will monitor, while somebody's in the bedroom, the level of oxygen saturations in a person's blood via the sensors that it uses.
And to the best of your understanding, is Oxyvision configured within EPUT to alert staff to a clinical deterioration on wards outside of seclusion wards and section 136?
It's in patients' bedrooms.
So generally across the trust?
Yes. There are still some areas that are still having it installed, I believe. But the areas that I'm aware of, I think the majority of the trust has got it. I think there is still some older adult wards, particularly dementia care wards, that are still having it installed at this moment in time, or plans to have it installed.
As to whether it's configured, whether or not there's a capability, but whether it's configured to EPUT staff, whether it's configured to alert staff to clinical deterioration. Is that functionality there
Yes.
across the wards as far as you know?
Yes.
Are you aware of examples of staff monitoring patients constantly on Oxyvision when, for example, there are concerns about patient safety?
It's been reported that has happened in other parts of the organisation. Prior to, well, when I was having responsibility for my clinical teams, I wasn't aware of that happening, but I am aware that it has happened in other localities.
Trying to clarify some dates and areas of responsibility you had from the evidence you gave earlier when I asked you questions about Bethany Lilly. What role did you have in relation to Peter Brough ward in December 2018 and January 2019?
I don't believe I was the clinical manager matron for Peter Brough then.
Why do you say that?
I took over responsibility for Peter Brough after the Bethany Lilly incident.
In your statement, as I read it, it was some point in 2018.
Quite possibly, I may have put the wrong date down. I took over responsibility for Peter Brough after the Bethany Lilly incident.
And what makes you sure, to the extent that you are, about that?
I was asked to take over responsibility for Peter Brough after that incident occurred. I am aware of the incident that occurred for that, and I was also aware of the some of the prevention of future deaths actions that needed to be carried out after the incident as well, particularly with the relation for the handover from Peter Brough to what was the Thorpe ward at the time in Basildon.
So, just so I understand it, your answer and your level of certainty is partly informed by the context of you taking over responsibility for Peter Brough.
Yes.
And did that include responsibilities for addressing recommendations in Bethany Lilly's RCA?
Yes.
And how they were monitored? What steps did you take?
So one of the key actions from the inquest was to ensure that there was a regular meeting between the two sites. So, for example, there was a monthly meeting that was set up to discuss between what was Peter Brough and the Thorpe ward, which is now no longer operational, it's a different ward. And there was an action that myself, my counterpart for that site, and the ward managers would have a meeting to look at if there were any transfers that had occurred that had difficulties or omissions. And that was definitely one of the clear actions from the investigation that should happen, and that has continued up until my going on my secondment for Mid and South Essex at the moment. So that has continued all that time between the incident occurring and the notification of the prevention of future deaths to myself going on secondment.
More related in terms of dates, we also discussed the case of Sharon Kelly, and your answer to questions was that you did not have major responsibility for Peter Brough unit in May 2019, which was the date of Sharon Kelly's admission to Peter Brough. Can you, in light of what we've just discussed, be any clearer about the date at which you took over responsibility of Peter Brough?
I can't give you a categorically clear time frame for when I took over Peter Bruff's responsibility. Sharon Kelly might have been a patient when I was doing the RCA investigation for her, whilst I was the clinical manager for Peter Bruff at the time. I cannot recall specifically the specific date that I took over Peter Bruff, specifically in regards to those particular timeframes.
And more generally in relation to investigations, based on the evidence you've already given, when drafting reports, would you normally seek family views in terms of their input and also with recommendations?
My professional experience has been the fact that generally the flows will be the conduit for asking questions that the family would like EPUT to be investigating. For myself, professionally, I will overtly meet with the family myself to make sure that actually I listen to whatever kind of question it is that they are wanting to put towards the organisation that the flow could pick up. But I think it's only reasonable that they meet with me to actually look at what it is that they would like to articulate to the organisation clearly themselves, whilst not taking away the flow's role. I think for the two cases that were referred to, I met with the family to make sure that they felt that they were able to articulate to me what it is they would like me to try and investigate as part of my investigation for EPUT. It's not always something that I did previously, but it's something over probably the past 10 years I've felt that it's been very helpful for the families to be part of that kind of conversation with an investigator, and to then make sure that it's very clear what it is, if there are any extra questions that the family would like to put to EPUT, that we could answer them clearly as well.
And how would you ensure that you had all relevant material and information for your reports?
The most obvious resources are the people that have been working with that particular person. So it will quite often be the clinical care team that have offered care for that particular person. The clinical records that we use for recording patient details are a very good resource. We don't have as much these days, but paper records are still available for if I need them to undertake an investigation, which I have done, access patient records, and staff colleagues, and also sometimes the family, to make sure that if there are things that I'm not too sure about, I would also use them as a resource as well. The resources can be quite significant, but predominantly it's colleagues and people that have worked with a patient.
We discussed earlier Adam Steele's death in October 2021. And I just want to take you back to paragraph 192.
92. Thank you.
On page 31. You describe the practice of that appears to have developed by not going into patient bedrooms so as to not disturb them through the night. You say, I was unaware that this practice had developed over the time of the Oxyvision system being installed. With the approach being brought to my and the team's attention, the revisiting of the standard operational policy for the entire team was revisited. What was it about revisiting the SOP that you thought would assist the team's understanding, and what misunderstanding or practice were you seeking to address?
The team were trying to offer a less disruptive way of caring for a patient. So rather than having a door opened, going in, potentially putting a torch on someone to make sure that they're breathing safely, the team were utilising Oxyvision as a tool to be less intrusive. The policy itself is very clear, and well, it hopefully is clear enough to say the physical check is part of the expectation. Oxyvision is there to assist the team, not to replace the team in doing what they need to do. So the standing operating procedure is clear in saying actually observations still need to be done face to face as the policy stipulates.
And lastly, on the same subject, at paragraph 194, you say that following Mr. Steele's death, you refreshed the ward team's understanding of the need to adhere to the SOP and sought to move the team from simply recording observed to engaging with patients and recording more descriptive notes. Why did you consider that adherence to the SOP would achieve that outcome?
As the fact that it's about making sure people are doing the physical checks in to engage with a person rather than relying on a tool that is there as a supplementary aspect.
And so is it that you understood the SOP to require that staff were not
Yes.
doing? Thank you, Mr. Arthur. I have no further questions. Madam Chair, do you have any?
No, I don't. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur.
Can I thank you very much indeed for coming to give evidence?
Thank you, ma'am.
And we sit again on Monday.
Yes, Madam.